You guys can turn over to the book of Hebrews chapter 10. Hebrews chapter 10. This evening I want to talk about one of those topics that we simply do not talk about. It's kind of strange, right? I mean, to tell you I'm going to talk about something that we don't talk about kind of means I'm talking about it, right? But anyhow, nevertheless, I think there's something that maybe we don't talk about, and maybe we don't talk about enough. And when I say that, what I mean, and what others typically mean, is that it's one of those subjects that is sort of taboo. It sort of, gets into the realm of where you're addressing perhaps folks in a way that maybe they think is too personal. Maybe they think is just a little too close to home. Maybe none of your business, kind of area but it is certainly one of those things that we need to address as far as the church goes, as far as Christianity as a whole goes. And it's one of those things that strikes deep into the heart of an issue that not only plagues the church, but also is something that just kind of runs rampant every once in a while, or now and again. And a lot of it is dictated kind of by culture and some of the expectations that we have. And you're wondering, what in the world is he talking about? Well, very simply, tonight we're going to talk about the idea or the concept of the boring church. Anybody ever heard someone say, church is just boring? Church is just boring. Or, and this is one of those, this is the area where we don't talk about it. I've never met really too many people who had the audacity to actually say that. But it doesn't take much to figure out that folks are bored, right? If you were standing there and you were talking to an individual and you were having a conversation with them and they kept checking their watch and they got this glazed over look, and when you asked them a question, they just went, huh? As if they weren't, paying attention to you. Would you get the idea that they were bored with the conversation that you were having? You ever go to a college class where there are 500 kids sitting in a room, and the guy up front is standing up there talking about, some sort of anthropological, concept that nobody really cares about or ever wanted to study, and you're not sure why this guy invested this amount of time studying this particular thing? I don't know about you. I did. I once had a teacher at Ohio State University. I'm not kidding. I may have told you this already. Ohio State University, a couple hundred people in this class. It was a linguistics class. I don't know if I told you about this or not. Linguistics class. You know what linguistics is, right? It's kind of the study of how you form the sounds, and where your tongue is placed in your mouth, and kind of the history of things. And great class, a wonderful class, at least the book. The guy who was teaching the class was this fella from China. And he spoke with this accent that no one could understand him. Again, I don't mean any offense by this, but it was as if the guy just got off the boat. And his accent was that thick, and he might as well have been speaking Chinese. We didn't get it. And most people, they fell asleep in the class because, we just can't get it. You can't get the information. So, we're able to tell. So maybe nobody verbalizes this idea, but, we're able to tell when folks are not tuned in, when folks are bored with some of the concepts that, we like to talk about when it comes to, Christianity and spirituality. It's funny. I was looking for a quote. About this very concept for the lesson tonight. Never did find the quote, but I got online and I just typed in the phrase "bored in church," and I got hundreds of websites. Most of them, at least the top, entire first page of hits that I got, they were all about what to do when you're bored in church. Entire websites dedicated to what to do when you're bored in church. So, I thought I would print a couple of them and bring them and read just a few to you. This was the first one I found. Here's a list. When you're bored in church, number 1, slap your neighbor. See if they really do turn the other cheek. If not, raise your hand and tell the preacher. Okay? Number 2, listen for your preacher to use a word beginning with A. then with B, and go all the way through the alphabet and see if you can find at least one word for every letter of the alphabet. Next one, use the church bulletins or the visitor cards or other raw material you can find laying around in the pew to design, test, and modify a collection of airplanes. Okay? Next one, start from the back of the church. It's funny because my brother and I actually did this one. Okay, start from the back of the church and try to crawl all the way to the front under the pews without being noticed. Are you laughing because it's funny or because I tried it? Okay. Chew gum. If the sermon goes on for more than 15 minutes, start blowing bubbles. Okay? And there's a whole list of them here. The last one, though, is choose a different song than that was announced and begin singing it as loud as you can. Okay? Literally, hundreds of things. Hundreds of suggestions. Again, entire websites dedicated to what to do when you're bored in church, which kind of tells me something. There are a lot of folks who are bored in church. There are a lot of folks who sit in pews on Sunday morning, and for some reason, they not only don't get anything out of it, but chances are their boredom is just simply discouraging other people from being, connected. So it's a problem. So what do we do about it? I mean, you read the Bible as a whole. And does God seem pretty excited about the things that he has to say? I mean, is he pretty excited about, giving his word? I think he is. I mean, look at the ways in which it was given. I mean, just go to Pentecost. Go to Pentecost. And there on that day, there's that sound like a rushing wind and those tongues of fire that seem to alight on their heads. And they start speaking in languages that, they had never once even studied. And they preach this sermon that just, impacts people. And there are thousands of people who are converted on that day. And you move through the entirety of the book of Acts. And you realize that, they're flawed people. They've got difficulties. They don't have any, more or less difficulties than we have today. But you know what? They're on fire, and they're moving forward, and they're excited, and God is doing exciting things through them. You go back even further in time, and you can look at how he works in the prophets, and you can look at how, he works through individuals throughout time. God seems very excited about what he is doing in humanity. I mean, you come up to that crowning book of the New Testament, whose theme is we have victory. We gain the prize. With God, we win. And just look at the language that is used. Oh, maybe we don't understand it all. Maybe we don't understand all of that, dragons and beasts and horsemen and apocalypse and all of that. But in grand fashion, God paints us this picture of just how victorious we can be if we simply follow his will. There's nothing boring about that. There's nothing boring about, the Bible. And this is something that I slowly, over the course of time, have taught, some of the middle school kids down at Gulf Coast. The Bible is full of everything that we desire in, other aspects of life. I mean, if you're a drama type person, man, the Bible is full of that type of thing. I mean, if you want... no matter what kind of movies you like, man, you can find something in the Bible that fits. Whatever we're drawn to, there's something there for you. Love stories. Stories about war. Stories about people committed to a cause, though everybody's against them. The underdog story, Like, Rudy? Anybody see Rudy? Movie? Oh, man, how many Rudys are there in the Bible? I mean, you could begin at the beginning and just literally list them. There are tons of stories like that. So we have all of these things in the Bible, and God has made it exciting for us in every way, and yet somehow there's this, disconnect. Somehow we have a lot of people in our day and age that are bored with church. Now, a lot of folks, when it comes to these things, they want to blame a lot of things. Well, we just live in an entertainment kind of society, and when I can just turn the TV on and go to this program and, watch it, then why would I want to go and listen to someone talk? Or, if I can be entertained and do nothing, and pick up a gadget or, do minimal amount of work, then, why would I ever do these types of things? Well, for some reason that really doesn't track. Really doesn't track. Because if we're truly interested in doing God's will, if we're truly interested in reading his word and studying it and coming to know it, then we're going to realize pretty quickly that these things over here, These things over here, while they may be distractions, are certainly not things that are outside the realm of possibility sometimes for use in helping me know and understand some of these things. You know, the same device that you can use to play that distracting game on can be used to read the Bible. So, you know, we can't blame it on the machinery. We can't blame it on the big screen. Can't blame it on God because He's provided everything we need. Oh, but maybe it's those people who lead down there. Well, you know, I'll be honest with you. Each and every week goes by, and I try to do my best to think, you know, what would make this better? You know, what would make the lesson better? And sometimes I think I get it, and sometimes I don't get it, and some folks are real good about telling me, you know, that I didn't get it. And some folks are telling me, real good about telling me, you know, you really did that. It really caught my attention, really, you know, hit me. But there's an effort to try that. There's an effort to try to make it something that people can kind of get on board with and really get excited about. I know our song leaders, you know, they try. You know, try to coordinate the songs with the lessons and things like that. And I know those who are, you know, leading the prayer, you know, they try. Now, sometimes, you know, like tonight, you didn't have much lead time. But there are plenty of things we can do from the leading end of it. But by all means, those who lead worship, they're not to blame either. If you didn't get anything out of it, then you've pretty much already answered your question as to whose fault it is, right? You know, I didn't get anything out of that. You could have stopped after the I, and you had the answer to your question. Because that's just the way it is. It's the way it is. You know, I've always, when someone once told me this, and I've always found it to be true. Even if you have to sit and listen to the worst singing, the thinnest prayers, and the most horrible lessons that you have ever heard, if you try hard enough, you can always take away a lesson when God's people assemble. And it's the truth, if we're willing to try. But there are things that are essential for us. You know, I don't know about you, but I strive not to fall in the paths of a lot of folks who just kind of want to go along to sort of get along. And, you know, I'm just going to be part of this larger spiritual community, and I'm going to claim I'm spiritual. And you know, it's just going to be some kind of watered down sort of, you know, milquetoast type of thing that I really can't define or put my hands around. That's not me, and I hope that's not you. And I hope that each and every week your desire is to break away from that mold. To break away from that mold and to actually do something that is real and spiritual and significant. I hope that's your thought each and every day. Each and every hour. But when we just sit in church and we're bored, when we sit with the church and we're just simply bored, well, then we're just kind of following along with the masses of people who are bored. No one else is going to come along and do it for you. No one else is going to come along and get you excited. And if we're waiting for that to happen, then we may be waiting a long time. But there are things that we can do to help. There are things that you can do to help keep you from being bored when it comes to the idea of the church assembly. You see, that brings us to Hebrews. Man. The book of Hebrews, chapter 10. This is a passage that we bring up a lot. It's a passage that I know personally I've used in lessons at least 3 to 4 times since the beginning of the year. But Hebrews chapter 11, beginning with verse 24, and let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day, as you see the day drawing near. It talks here about not forsaking the assembly. But he also talks, notice this, it's not just a matter of being there. There's no place in the Bible that just where God comes along and says, hey, just make sure you're there. Because that's the most important thing. Just make sure you're there. You know, it's funny. If I go to the gas station with my car and it's on E, and I just sit in front of the pump, is the car going to fill up? No. I got to get out of the car. I got to pick up the pump. I got to stick it in that little hole there, and I got to actually pump something. That's the way it is. I mean, if I play sports, Okay? Is it enough for me to just show up at the field and sit in the car and watch the rest of my team play? No. We got to actually get involved. We got to actually do something. And that's point number one. Paul says here, he says, consider how to stir one another to love and good works. There's more about being there than simply being there. First of all, we need to participate by leaving. Okay? Participate by leaving. Now that sounds kind of odd. What in the world do you mean? Participate, you told me to come here and now you're telling me to leave? Well, not all of you. Not all of you. Okay? What I mean very simply is this. As soon as you come in and you are assembled with the saints and you go to that, comfy little pew that is your space within the building that is owned by the church, by the time you come and you're assembling with the saints, you should have already set aside the cares, the worries, the stresses, the concerns, the guilt, and all these other things that are part of that life out there, that are part of what is going to distract you once you come in here. Now, that takes training. It's a difficult thing to have to come here. And again, I'm not saying just put on the happy face. Come to the church and play the hypocrite. Wear the mask. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is church should be to you, coming to church, being with the saints, assembling with brothers and sisters in Christ, ought to be of such a nature that you can come here and you can lay those things out so that they are done away with. I mean, isn't that what Christ said? If you go over to the book of Matthew in chapter 11, in verses 28 through 30, he says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Now, if we're supposed to come to him, and when we do come to him, we're bringing him the burden, and in that burden, with that burden, we have faith enough to place it firmly within his hands. Then shouldn't it be the case that when I'm assembling here with the saints, his body, over which he is head, that having set those things aside, I can now focus on giving him the praise, giving him the glory, giving him the honor, worshiping God in a manner that is fitting? Now, maybe part of the reason why so many folks are bored is because they really don't believe the things that are going on. They really don't think that coming to Christ or worshiping him or giving him your burden means that they're actually going to go away. They don't have the faith, that Christ said would move mountains, would make a difference, would actually transform your life. We don't bring those things to him. And the idea really is very simple. Church is just simply something I do. It's not something that's designed to impact my day-to-day living. It's not something that is going to take away my worries and fears and anxieties and help me struggle through those things. So this whole concept of me bringing them to him, well, that too is just kind of more lip service than anything else. But it is essential that we lay ourselves bare before him and thus rid ourselves of these things if we are going to enter his presence with thanksgiving and actually have an assembling with the saints that is beneficial to us. I mean, if we don't perceive it as being practical, then why would I ever sit here and take any practical knowledge from it? That doesn't make any sense. But we have to first let go of that baggage before we can move forward. Move forward in our understanding and have that excitement and that zeal about it. I mean, you ever take a vacation and fly somewhere? You pack the big bags, right? You're going to be gone for a couple of weeks. You pack up the big bags, you go, and you get on the airplane, and you give them to, the people who are going to check your bag, right? When you get on the plane, they don't bring your bag to you and set it on your lap. They take your bag, and they put it in that cargo hold so that you can ride the airplane, kind of in the comfort of that, 6-inch wide seat that they give you, right? Well, kind of the same thing here. You know, this assembling together is this weekly vacation from the world. And when we come through those doors, it ought to be first and foremost about emptying that baggage, whether that means we are confessing our faults one to another, or just simply approaching God and saying, take these things from me. Or taking something from the message that will allow you to help rid your life of those. No matter what it is, we have to first tune in by letting go. We have to first show up by leaving those things behind. Number two, we need to realize that the church is not meant to be boring. If we're going to realize the church is not meant to be boring, then we need to participate by listening. By listening. You know, the Bible talks a lot about listening. Matter of fact, it talks a lot about listening more than many subjects. You know, every time that it talks about who has an ear to hear, let him hear. Or hearing at all, really, is the Bible is talking about, listening. It's interesting. There's a context. You ever compare, you read through the book of Acts, do you ever compare the conversion of Paul? It's mentioned 3 times in the book of Acts. Chapter 9, chapter 22, and chapter 26. If you look at chapter 9 and you compare it to chapter 22, there's some odd differences, especially if you're reading some of the older versions of the Bible. In some of the older versions of the Bible, in the first context, it says that the guys who were with Paul heard the voice but saw nothing. If you go to chapter 22, in that same translation of the Bible, it will say that they did not hear anything. They didn't hear. And you're thinking, that's kind of odd. One says that they did, one says that they didn't. And if you begin to study those words, which, maybe you'll never do, so I'll tell you tonight. You begin to study those words, and what you begin to realize is that the idea that is being emphasized is not so much the ability to hear something, but the ability to understand. You see, in the first context, Paul just simply says, they heard, but they heard not with understanding. In the second context, he uses a different word, and it's just assumed. They did not hear. In other words, they did not understand. So essentially, he's saying the same thing. It's just kind of translated in an odd way. But the whole reason I mentioned that is very simply this. To not understand is to not hear. If we are using biblical terms as biblical terms, the Bible, when it uses the word hear, it means you understand. And to understand, we have to listen. We have to actively participate in all parts of the worship and the assembling of ourselves, together. You go back to Hebrews chapter 10, verses 24 and 25. Let us consider one another, how to stir up one another to love and good works. Now you'll notice this, consider one another, how to. Where do you think that considering and that how to comes in here? How am I going to provoke you to love? How am I going to provoke you to good works? How? Well, I have to consider you. I have to understand you. I have to know you. Now, in communication terms, that's the idea of listening. That's the idea of listening so that I can process not just a bunch of information, but so that I can process exactly what it is that God requires of me and how it is that I can meet the needs of those who are about me. That's what Paul refers to. When it comes to worship, in general, we need to be about the task of, listening. And listening is a mental process that requires us to think. Now, what do you need in order to think? Now, everybody's a little different here. What do you need in order to think? Sometimes the last thing you want to do, let's face it, coming to worship should not be like the Rays game. It's not like your football game. If you expect the worship to be like, the football game or the Rays game or going to a movie, then I'm sorry, you're missing it. It's not supposed to be like that. If you want to picture it more as a classroom, then that's a little bit closer. But it's certainly not a piece of entertainment. You want to picture it as a classroom where you're supposed to take notes, where you're supposed to be involved, where you're supposed to try to learn something every time, whether it's from the song. When you sing those songs and you listen to the lyrics and somehow it touches you and you pick up something from that, or whether it's from the lesson or something that's said at the Lord's Supper table, or just the simple time that you have here meditating on giving God praise. There ought to be a lesson for us each and every week. There ought to be something that betters my spirituality each and every week. But the only way you get there is by, quote, listening, by activating the mind, and by giving it effort. I don't know. I think when we think of the church as, well, not the church, but when we think of worship as a boring thing, and we combine that with, an age-old concept that we always talk about when it comes to worship. What is the center of our worship? I mean, who is the object of our worship? God is, right? Well, what do you think God's going to think? What do you think he's going to think if he comes, he's got to come every week to this boring place with these boring people who want to do these boring things? Do we really think that's going to make God happy? I don't think it would. Matter of fact, we can go to other places in the Bible and we can find that kind of mentality, that kind of half-hearted investment in, Christianity as a whole does not please God. God wants full commitment. He wants us all in. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with what? All thy heart, all thy mind, all thy soul, all thy strength, if we combine all the times it occurs. With everything. With everything. And that's just not daily living. That's when we assemble too. So when we say things like, well, that worship was boring, I didn't get anything out of it, all you're really doing is giving commentary about yourself. Because, see, it's your job. It's your job to worship God while you're here. It's not the preacher's job. He's leading the thought, sure. It's not the song leader's job. It's not the elder's job. You as an individual, when you are here and engaged in worship, it's your job to be involved. Finally, the last thing. We need to participate by meeting others. By meeting others. We come here, we worship, we have fellowship with one another. That's part of the reason why we assemble. And by it, we are made stronger. Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 10 says, if one falls down, his friend can help him up. But pity the man who falls and has no one to help him up. It should be okay for us to come and let down our walls with other Christians. I mean, it should be okay to let folks know, hey, man, I'm struggling with this. I've fallen down. I need help. Woe to the man who falls down and has no help. And we can kind of add to that. Woe is the man who falls down and has people all around him and yet doesn't cry out for help. I've never understood that. I tell you, I'll be the first one. Well, this is going on and that's going on, but I don't want anybody to know. Okay, well, I guess I'm nobody then, because you told me. Prayer is a powerful thing. Fellowship is a wonderful thing. And we ought to want to be involved in that. And are we involved? Coming together to worship is just that, coming together. And if I'm sitting in a room with a bunch of people whose names I don't know, then it's going to make a big difference. If we're united in what we do, in our praise to God and our assembling together, then certainly it's much, much better. It's kind of like, being united in song. If I'm singing at, this pace, and another person is singing at this pace, and another person is singing, well, nobody can identify what pace, and we're all in, a different whatever key, how's that going to sound? Probably not too good, right? Well, if we come to know each other and we're united, then it's certainly going to be more pleasing to God. We go to church, we need to meditate. We need to understand that our God is a big and awesome God. And he has gone literally out of his way, not just to provide for us, but to provide for us in such an exciting fashion, in such a powerfully charged fashion, that we should be excited about it. And if we're not, then it's time to self-examine. It's time to look inward and ask ourselves, why are we not excited? And what can we do to actually get excited? That's the big thing. That's the big thing, really. Because, I mean, you know, if our end game is not, man, how can I better plug in? Man, how can I grow more? Man, how can I move from, you know, this kind of bored in worship state to, you know, getting excited about it? Getting so excited about it that, you know, I've got my notes and I've got all this and I want to talk about it afterwards. Not just to you know, other Christians, but man, I want to go out there and I want to talk about this message. See, that's kind of the next step in this whole thing. If I'm bored here, what am I going to carry out there? And is what I'm carrying out there, is it going to be anything that would entice anybody to come here? All of that is kind of important in the grand scheme of things. But none of it is important if you don't have first a relationship with God. That's the building block. Coming to understand him, hearing his word and believing. Letting it produce in us a faith that allows us to deal with the sin that's in our life by repenting of it. Confessing the name of Christ, being baptized in the waters of baptism so we can rise to walk in newness of life. Maybe we've done all that. Maybe the journey is just difficult to the point where we found ourselves drawing back from the worship, drawing back, you know, and maybe that doesn't mean we're not here. Maybe we're here. Maybe our habit has yet to lapse into that not being here stage. But we're simply not plugged in. We're not involved. Or maybe that's you. Or maybe you have some other need. If you're here this evening and you are subject to the invitation's call, we urge you to come as we stand and sing.